I want to tell you something before I tell you anything else. I did not cry at my sister's wedding. I did not make a scene. I did not stand up during the moment when the officiant asked if anyone had reason to object, though I will admit that moment lasted longer in my chest than I expected it to. I sat in the third row on the left side, the side that is traditionally the bride's side, wearing a dove-gray dress I had purchased from a department store rack 2 weeks before the ceremony, and I watched my younger sister walk down the aisle in a wedding gown that had, 8 months earlier, been ordered under my name. I watched her hold hands at the altar with a man who had once told me, in the parking lot of my own studio on a Tuesday evening in March, that I was the only woman he had ever wanted to build a life with. I watched the officiant pronounce them married. I watched them kiss. I watched my mother press a handkerchief to the corners of her eyes in the front row. And then I looked down at my own hands, folded in my lap, and I looked at the ring I was wearing on my right hand that evening, the real one, the one I had designed from a blank page and a sourced stone in 9 years of trained precision, the one I had taken back before any of this began. And I thought, no. I do not need to say a single word. Because I already said everything that needed saying. I said it in the only language I have ever fully trusted. The language of what is real and what only looks like it is. My name is Claire Alderman. I am 31 years old, and I have spent the last 9 years learning to see things that most people walk past without noticing. I am a fine jewelry designer and a certified gemologist, which means I have trained my eyes and my hands to distinguish between the genuine and the imitation at distances that would surprise you. I can tell a natural sapphire from a synthetic one under normal indoor lighting. I can identify a treated stone from its inclusions. I can look at a setting and tell you, within a few seconds, whether the person who made it understood the material they were working with or was simply copying a shape they had seen somewhere else. I can also, it turns out, tell when the person sitting across from me at dinner is performing a version of himself that does not match the version he is when I am not in the room. I know that now. I did not always. I had to learn it the same way I learned everything else I know, by paying very close attention to things that did not quite line up, and then following the inconsistency until I understood what it was actually telling me. This is the story of what I found when I started looking. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ohio, the older of 2 daughters in a family that was not wealthy but was not struggling, the kind of family that paid its bills with care and chose its purchases deliberately and occasionally could not afford 2 good things at the same time. My sister Jenna is 3 years younger than me. She is the kind of beautiful that makes strangers stop mid-sentence. I am not saying this unkindly. I am saying it the way I say most things, as an observation, because it has always been simply true. When we were children and my mother dressed us for family photographs or church or the school concert, and there was one good dress between us, Jenna wore it. I understood this without being told. I wore the other one and I stood straight and I smiled and I told myself it did not matter, which was true most of the time and almost true the rest of the time. Jenna and I were not close the way sisters in stories are close. We did not have whispered conversations or shared secrets or the particular shorthand that comes from truly choosing each other. We had proximity. We had a shared bathroom and a shared holiday table and a shared set of parents who loved us both in their way, which was not always the same way and was not always equal but was genuine, as far as I could tell. I was the responsible one, the one who got the grades and kept the schedule and managed the household logic when my parents were overwhelmed by the ordinary chaos of 2 working adults trying to do their best. Jenna was the one who needed things. And I, without anyone asking me to, became the one who provided them. I do not think I resented this when I was a child. I think I did not know yet that there was another option. You absorb the role you are given early enough and it becomes so much a part of your structure that you cannot always tell where the role ends and you begin. I moved away for college at 18. I studied fine art with a concentration in metalwork, which my parents received with the particular silence of people who have decided to be supportive of a choice they do not fully understand. I was a good student. I was a disciplined student. I graduated and spent a year working for a metalsmith in Cincinnati before I applied for and received a position as a junior designer at Gloria Marsh Designs, which is based in the city I live in now and which is, among people who know anything about estate jewelry and certified gemological appraisal, one of the most respected firms of its kind in the region. Gloria hired me on a Tuesday and on Thursday of that same week asked me to re-evaluate a parcel of emeralds a client had brought in for appraisal, because she wanted to see how I looked at things before she decided how to use me. I looked at the emeralds for about 4 minutes and told her 2 of them had been fracture-filled, which was not disclosed in the original documentation, and that the treatment affected their value by approximately 40%. Gloria looked at me for a moment and then said, "Good. Start Monday." I worked for Gloria for 9 years. I became her lead designer. I sourced stones for her highest value commissions. I contributed appraisal documentation to estates, insurance settlements, family trusts. My name and my signature became part of the paperwork that gave things their established value. There is something I find deeply satisfying about that kind of work, the work of making the true value of something legible, of putting your name on a document and saying, "This is what this is worth, and I will stand behind that statement." It suits me in a way that I did not always know how to explain to people, but which makes perfect sense to me. Derek Calloway came into my life at a charity fundraising gala 4 years ago. I was there as a representative of Gloria's firm, which donated a piece to the live auction each year, and I was standing near the bar with a glass of sparkling water I had been nursing for 40 minutes, trying to look like someone who was enjoying herself at a party, which has never been my most natural expression. Derek walked up and said, without preamble, "You look like you are calculating the exit routes." I told him I had already calculated them. There were 3. He laughed at that, which was the right response, and we talked for the rest of the event. He was 33 at the time, the younger son of a family with old local money that had diversified over the years into property management and small-scale commercial real estate. He was charming in the particular way of people who are genuinely interested in whoever they are talking to, which is different from the performance of charm and is much harder to resist. He was funny without trying to be. He asked questions and then listened to the answers, which sounds like a minimum standard of human behavior but is, in practice, much rarer than it should be. We dated for 6 months before I introduced him to my family, and another 18 months before he proposed. 2 years of accumulating evidence, I suppose. 2 years of building the case, as I think of it now with the kind of dark humor that helps me look at things clearly, that he was who he appeared to be. He came to my studio on a Wednesday afternoon in late February, 3 years ago. He sat on the stool on the client side of my workbench while I finished a setting I was working on, and he said, "I want to ask you something, but I want to ask it the right way first." He said, "If you were designing the ring of your life, the one that would be on your hand in every photograph from now until the last one, what would it look like?" I looked up from the setting. I said, "Are you asking because you want to know, or because you need a blueprint?" He smiled and said, "Both." So I designed it. Right there, while he watched. I pulled out a fresh page and I sketched, and I talked through what I was doing the way I always talk through a design when I am working something out, and what emerged was something I had never drawn before. A cushion-cut sapphire as the center stone, deep salon blue, the color that reads differently in natural light than it does under artificial light, which is one of the things I love most about sapphires, that they hold secrets about their color depending on what is illuminating them. Set in hand fabricated platinum. Small old mine cut diamonds on each shoulder, not round brilliants, because I find round brilliants too obvious, but old mine cuts, which have a softness to their light that I prefer. A slightly elevated setting, not too high, just enough to allow light to enter from below the stone and travel through it properly. I sourced the sapphire myself. I called 3 dealers before I found the stone that matched the drawing, and when I held it under my loupe for the first time I knew it immediately, the way you sometimes know a stone will perform before you have even tested it under light. I certified it through our firm. I fabricated the ring over 3 weeks, which is faster than I would normally work, but I wanted it finished. I wanted to see the thing that had only existed in my imagination become an object I could hold. He slid it onto my finger in the studio parking lot on a Tuesday evening in March. He had been pretending all day that he had a meeting nearby and would stop by, which is not the most elaborate ruse, But I had decided not to notice the tells because sometimes you want to be surprised even when you are not. It fit perfectly because I had made it to fit perfectly. I looked at it on my hand in the parking lot light and I thought, yes. This is exactly right. This is the thing I made that belongs to me. That is the sentence I keep coming back to when I think about everything that came after. The thing I made that belonged to me. My sister Jenna met Derek at the engagement party my parents hosted in April, 3 weeks after the proposal. She was quiet that evening in a way I noticed but did not examine. She helped in the kitchen and she smiled at all the right moments and she hugged me at the end of the night and said she was so happy for me. I remember thinking she seemed tired. I remember thinking I should check in with her later that week about how she was doing. I did not think anything else. She and Derek talked at that party for perhaps 20 minutes. I was across the room when it happened. I saw them from a distance, the two of them near the kitchen doorway, and I thought, good. They are getting along. My sister and my fiance are getting along. This is how it is supposed to go. I did not look closely enough. I had not yet learned what I later learned about myself, which is that I am capable of looking at something with extraordinary precision when I have been trained to examine it, and of missing entirely what is right in front of me when I have decided in advance that there is nothing to find. The months between April and the following January were the months I now think of as the before. The months when I was living inside a version of the story I thought was true. I was planning a wedding. I had booked a venue, a caterer, a florist. I had chosen a dress, which required 3 appointments and a great deal of patience, and which was ordered under my name in September. I was also working harder than I had ever worked because Gloria was considering a significant expansion of our appraisal division and I was the person she most wanted to bring along for it. My life was, by the measures most people would apply, going exactly as it was supposed to go. Derek started working late in April. He had a new development project, a commercial property in a neighborhood that was just beginning to shift in the direction that made property speculation interesting to people like his father, and the hours were long and irregular. I believed him because I had no reason not to believe him and because I was busy enough with my own work that I was not watching the calendar of his absences with the attention that, in retrospect, they deserved. He was also at my parents' house for dinner more often than before. He and my father had a rapport I had always been glad of, and my mother liked him with the specific enthusiasm of a woman whose daughter had spent most of her 20s so devoted to her career that the question of whether she would ever bring someone home had become a recurring, careful dinner table subject. Jenna was at many of those dinners. Jenna lived 15 minutes from my parents and stopped by often. I thought nothing of it. They were my family. He was becoming my family. Of course they were together in the same rooms. I think about this sometimes, the way the evidence arranges itself in plain sight when you are not looking for it. The way everything that later seemed obvious was, at the time, simply the furniture of ordinary life. I am a trained observer of physical objects. I am excellent at seeing what is in front of me when I know what I am looking at. What I did not yet know how to see, before that January, was the shape of a betrayal assembled slowly by people I trusted completely. That changed with a ring box. Jenna came to my studio on a Thursday afternoon in January. I was in the middle of a commission for a client's anniversary gift, a matched pair of gold cufflinks, nothing complicated, but detailed enough to require my full attention. She knocked on the glass door of the studio and I let her in and she said she wanted to commission something small. A gift for a friend, she said. Someone who had been going through a hard time and who deserved something special. She was specific about what she wanted. A slim rectangular box, hinged lid, brushed gold exterior. Not a ring box exactly, but the shape that suggests one, the shape that says, "What is inside this matters." She wanted an interior inscription on the base panel of the lid. She typed it herself on the order form tablet I keep at the front of the studio, and she paid in cash, which I noted without questioning because some clients prefer cash and I had no reason to wonder about it. She left quickly, saying she had somewhere to be, and I walked her to the door and said I would have the piece ready in 3 weeks and I would text her when it was done. I went back to the cufflinks. I did not open the order form to read what she had typed. I had 3 commissions ahead of hers in my production queue, and I filed her order in the folder I keep for active jobs and got back to the anniversary gift. It was 12 days later, on a Tuesday evening, when I pulled her order to begin the production work. I opened the order form to review the inscription so I could transfer it to the fabrication notes. I read it once. Then I read it again. Then I set the tablet down on my workbench and sat on the stool by the window that looks out onto the parking lot, the same window I had been looking out of when Derek proposed, and I did not move for a very long time. The inscription read, "4D March 11th was the beginning of everything. Now let it be the beginning of us. J." March 11th was the date Derek had proposed to me. I want to try to describe what that moment was like in a way that is accurate rather than performed, because I have thought about it many times since, and I believe accuracy matters more than drama when you are telling a story that is true. It was not a sudden collapse. It was not a single wave of feeling that knocked me sideways. It was more like something very precisely cut, a clean incision made by a very sharp instrument, so precise that the full extent of the wound takes a moment to register. I sat there until the parking lot outside the window had gone from full to nearly empty, which meant it was somewhere past 8 in the evening. Then I picked up the tablet. I read the inscription again, more slowly. 4D March 11th. J. I thought about every dinner, every party, every kitchen doorway conversation I had not examined closely enough. I thought about the way Jenna had hugged me at the engagement party. I thought about the particular texture of her silence in certain rooms. Then I put the tablet in my bag, locked the studio, drove home, and sat in the bathtub until the water went cold. I did not call Derek that night. I did not call Jenna. I did not do anything that the situation seemed to be demanding of me, which was to confront, to accuse, to react. I had learned early in my career that the worst thing you can do when you suspect a stone has been misrepresented is to announce your suspicion before you have completed your examination. You examine first. You document what you find. Then you present the findings. I applied this principle to the situation in my bathtub, and then I started making a list. Not of feelings, because feelings were happening whether I listed them or not. A list of facts. Fact. Jenna had ordered a box inscribed to someone whose initial was D, referencing a date that was Derek's and my engagement date, using her own initial. Fact. Derek had begun keeping irregular hours in April, 2 weeks after meeting Jenna at our engagement party. Fact. He had also, I now recalled, shown an unusual degree of interest in Jenna's life at various family dinners, asking about her work and her friends with more attentiveness than I had noticed him showing before. Fact. In November, 3 months before the ring box, Jenna had mentioned at a family dinner that she had recently made a new friend in the property sector. She had not named the friend. I had not asked. I had been thinking about the appraisal deadline I had the following morning. Fact. The sapphire at the center of my engagement ring had been sourced, certified, designed, and fabricated by me. The provenance documentation was in my firm's archive. My signature was on every relevant paper. That ring existed in the world because of my hands and my training and my name, and that fact was not altered by anything that had happened between 2 people who had been in rooms together without me. That last fact was the one I kept returning to in the days that followed, not as a comfort exactly, but as a foundation. Something solid in a landscape that had suddenly become unreliable. That ring was mine in ways that went beyond sentiment or legal ownership. It was an extension of my professional identity. And I decided in that bathtub on a Tuesday night in January, not going to allow it to sit on a finger it did not belong to. The following morning I woke early, before my alarm, and I lay in the gray light of a January morning and I made 2 decisions. The first decision was that I was going to take the ring back before anything else happened. The second decision was that I was going to do it with the same care and precision I brought to everything I valued. The replica took me 4 days to fabricate. I worked on it at the studio during hours when I was alone, which was most hours, because I have always been an early morning and late evening worker, and Gloria respected this about me without requiring explanation. I made the replica in synthetic blue spinel, which is not a common imitation for sapphire but is, in my professional opinion, the most convincing one when you are trying to fool someone who is not trained. It has the right weight, the right depth of color, the right surface reflectivity under casual light. Under a loupe it is immediately distinguishable. Under fluorescent lighting at a family dinner table it is, to anyone without training, perfect. The setting I reproduced as accurately as I could from my original fabrication notes. I know every measurement of the original ring because I made it, and I work from notes the way architects work from blueprints. The proportions were correct. The profile was correct. The weight was close enough that the difference would not register on a finger. The one thing I did differently was the bezel depth on the center stone. I set the synthetic spinel in a bezel that was precisely 2 mm shallower than the original, which would not be visible to anyone examining the ring casually but would, under certain conditions of pressure or impact, create a structural weakness in the stone's security. I made this decision deliberately, and I made it knowing what it would eventually mean. On a Saturday afternoon in late January, while Derek was at his parents' house for a lunch I had declined because of a work obligation I invented, I went to our shared apartment. I took the real ring off my finger. I held it for a moment under the kitchen window light, watching the way the sapphire shifted from royal blue to something almost teal in natural light, which is one of the characteristics of a high-quality Ceylon stone and is part of why I chose it. Then I placed it in a velvet pouch, put the pouch in my coat pocket, and removed the replica from my studio bag. I placed the replica on my left hand. Then I walked out of the apartment, drove to my studio, and locked the original ring in the vault where I keep stones waiting for settings. The ring in the vault was certified, documented, and appraised. It had my name on its provenance papers. It was mine in every legal and professional sense. The ring on my finger was a reproduction I had made myself, and only I knew that. I want to be clear about what this was and what it was not. It was not deception intended to harm anyone. It was the recovery of my own property, accomplished in a way that allowed me time to document the full extent of the situation before I was required to respond to it. I was, in the language of my profession, examining the specimen before announcing my findings. I wore the replica for 3 weeks. Derek never looked at it closely. He was not the kind of person who looked at things closely. I spent those 3 weeks building the case. I went through the messages on my phone with the attention of a conservator examining a manuscript, slowly, looking at everything I had not previously examined because I had not previously had reason to. What I found, assembled in its totality, told a story that was quite different from the one I had been living inside. There were messages from Derek to a contact listed as Dev, which I had assumed was a colleague named Devon who worked in property management, that when I looked at them closely did not read like professional correspondence. There were gaps in his location history on weekends when he had told me he was at his parents' property or at the site of the new development. There were, in my own message history with Jenna, a series of gradual thinnings, conversations that had been regular and then became occasional and then became, in the months since April, almost nothing. I had not noticed the thinning while it was happening. I noticed it now. I called Gloria. I did not tell her everything on that call. I told her I had a situation developing that might involve the Calloway family in a professional context, and that I wanted her to be aware of it. Gloria has known me for 9 years. She heard what I was not saying as clearly as what I was saying, which is one of the things about her that I have always trusted. She said, "Come in tomorrow. Bring whatever you have. We will look at it together." I went in on a Thursday morning with 3 folders. The first folder contained a printed summary of every text message and email I had documented. The second folder contained the provenance papers for the sapphire ring, with my certifications and signatures. The third folder contained a complete accounting of every financial contribution I had made to the shared life Derek and I had been building, including the $22,000 in non-refundable deposits paid from a joint wedding account. Gloria read through all 3 folders. She did not speak while she was reading. When she finished, she set the folders down on her desk and looked at me over her reading glasses, which she only wears in private because she finds them unglamorous, and she said, "You are the most prepared person I have ever worked with." This is not a compliment to the situation. It is a compliment to you. I told her I learned from the best. She made a sound that was approximately a laugh. Then she told me about the Calloway estate. The Calloway family had been clients of Gloria's firm for 11 years. The firm held the primary appraisal contract for Robert Calloway's estate jewelry collection, which had been accumulated over 3 generations and was used as collateral against 2 significant commercial loans Robert was in the process of restructuring. The collection included 18 pieces, ranging from Victorian mourning jewelry to an Art Deco bracelet of considerable value. Every piece had been appraised and certified by our firm. My name was on 7 of those appraisals. The collection's certified total value was a number that mattered enormously to the loan restructuring currently underway. Gloria told me this in the careful way she tells me things she wants me to have but does not want to appear to be weaponizing. She said, "I want you to understand the professional landscape here. I am not suggesting anything improper. I am suggesting that you understand the full context of your position, which is that your name, your signature, and your professional reputation are woven into matters that extend well beyond your personal life." I understood what she was telling me. And then she said something else. She said, "I have been planning to conduct a full provenance review on the Calloway collection as part of the next appraisal cycle. I always do this with long-standing clients. It is simply good practice. Given the restructuring timeline, I will likely begin that review in the next 2 months." She said it neutrally. She returned to her coffee. And I sat across from her and understood that the work she was about to do, work she would have done regardless, work that was her professional obligation, was going to produce findings that were accurate, that she would document with her customary precision, and that would arrive at whatever moment the appraisal cycle dictated, which she had some discretion over, and which she was telling me she intended to exercise thoughtfully. I drove home from that meeting and I sat in my car in the parking garage for about 10 minutes. Then I called Diane Navarro, the attorney a colleague had recommended, and I made an appointment. The conversation with Derek happened on a Sunday morning in early February, 3 weeks after I had made the switch. He had clearly prepared for it, which I know because he tends to speak more formally when he is saying something he has rehearsed, a tell that I had noticed long before that morning but had attributed to nervousness rather than dishonesty. He sat across from me in the kitchen of the apartment that was his name on the lease and mine in the life I had been pouring into it, and he said the things he had prepared to say. Growing in different directions. Not the partner you deserve. Owe it to you to be honest before things go further. He did not mention Jenna. He said it was about him. He was very convincing. I waited for him to finish. Then I asked 3 questions. I asked, "Is there someone else?" He said it was complicated. I asked, "Does the complication have a name?" He looked at the window. I said Jenna's name. I said it quietly, the way you say the answer to a question you already know. And his face, which had been performing careful sorrow, shifted into something more honest. The relief of exposure, which I have come to understand is a real thing, the way a secret is a weight and naming it removes the weight even at great cost. He did not ask how I knew. He said he was sorry. He said it had not been planned, as if accidents of this particular kind require planning to be worth addressing. He said he hoped we could get through the practical matters without it becoming complicated. I told him I would do my best. I was very calm. I had made the switch 3 weeks earlier. I had already spoken to Gloria. I already had a folder on Diane's desk. There was nothing for me to perform in that kitchen. The work had already been done. He moved out the following weekend. I helped carry boxes. When he reached for my left hand to return the ring, I slid the replica off and placed it in his palm without ceremony. He closed his fingers around it without examining it. He thanked me for being reasonable. I did not thank him for anything. What came next was, in certain ways, the harder part. I want to talk about what my family did, because I think it is the part of this story that I have had the hardest time understanding, and because I suspect that if you have ever been betrayed, the part that stays with you longest is not the betrayer but the witnesses who chose a side. My mother called me on a Tuesday, 4 days after Derek moved out. She said she needed to share something difficult. She said that Jenna had explained the situation to the family, and that the family's understanding was that Derek and I had reached a mutual decision to end the engagement, and that Jenna and Derek had subsequently developed feelings for each other in the weeks that followed. She used the word subsequently. She said she hoped I would be able to find grace in my heart as time passed, that these things happen, that Jenna was her daughter too. I asked my mother how long she had known about Jenna and Derek. The silence on that phone line was its own answer. It lasted 8 seconds. I counted them. Then my mother said she had only recently understood the full picture. I said, understood it or accepted it. She said that was not fair. I said, I know. I did not raise my voice. I had nothing left for raised voices. I thanked her for calling and I ended the call. My aunt sent a text message that said, "Life is complicated and love finds a way, thinking of you." My cousin Rena, who is the most honest person in my extended family and who I have always been grateful for, texted separately, "I am so sorry. I want you to know I think this is wrong." I said thank you and asked her not to put herself in the middle of it. She said she was already in the middle of it, because she was at the family dinner when my parents discussed it, which told me there had been a dinner, and there had been a discussion, and I had not been part of either. I was removed from the family group chat on a Wednesday morning. I know the day because I checked my phone before 6 in the morning as I always do, and there it was, no longer in my message list. Not blocked. Simply gone. The removal had happened sometime in the night, which means someone had deliberated about it while I slept. Jenna and Derek announced their engagement within 6 weeks of my engagement ending. The announcement appeared on social media with a photograph. Jenna's hand extended, the ring I had made visible on her finger, Derek's hand below hers, both of them in soft natural light in what appeared to be a garden somewhere. The photo had 412 likes when I saw it, which I saw because someone screenshot it and sent it to me, I cannot remember who. I zoomed in on the ring. Even at phone screen resolution, even in a garden under soft natural light, I could see it. The center stone did not move light the way the original did. It sat in its setting with the particular flatness of a synthetic, absorbing rather than refracting, present but inert. The replica was doing what it was designed to do, which was look convincing to everyone who was not trained to look more carefully. To me it looked like what it was. I did not comment on the post. I did not message Jenna. I put my phone face down on my workbench and I went back to the commission I was working on. The wedding deposits were a specific kind of loss because they were so ordinary. $22,000 across 3 vendors, all of it non-refundable by contract. The venue, the caterer, the florist. Each of them had been paid from the joint wedding account Derek and I had set up together. He offered to split the loss. $11,000 from him, $11,000 from me. He framed this as generosity. I wrote the number in my accounting notebook and moved on. The apartment was worse. The lease had been in Derek's name, which had never seemed like a problem when I believed in the permanence of what we were building together. It became a problem when he gave me 30 days to move my belongings. I moved my personal items and my studio equipment to the studio itself. I set up a cot in the back office and I lived there for 3 weeks while I found a sublet, which is not a comfortable way to live, but which had the advantage of meaning I was always at work, which was the only place my energy was going in a straight line during that period. I ate takeout at my workbench. I slept in my studio. I worked more hours than I should have and drank more coffee than was advisable and called no one because calling people requires energy I did not have and also because I had not yet finished examining the specimen. I was still in the documentation phase. There is something I want to say about the loneliness of that period, because I think it is important and because I think people who tell this kind of story often skip it. The betrayal was terrible, yes. But the loneliness was the thing that had texture and weight and duration. It was not the sharp pain of the discovery. It was the long, flat absence of the life I had expected to be living. The sound of the studio at 7 in the evening when everyone else had gone home. The feeling of waking up at 5 in the morning in a cot in my own back office and hearing the city doing what it does, moving and continuing and completely indifferent to the fact that I had lost, in the space of a few weeks, my engagement, my home, my family's allegiance, and $22,000 that I would not see again. I sat with that loneliness. I did not try to fill it with anything except work and time. I had learned, somewhere in the years of training my eyes and hands to be precise, that the worst thing you can do with a difficult material is to rush it. You sit with it. You let it tell you what it is. Then you work with what you actually have, not with what you wish you had. Gloria came to the studio one evening during that third week. She brought food from the Thai place 2 blocks away and she sat across from me at the workbench and she let me talk, which I did not do easily or briefly. When I finished, she did not offer reassurance. She offered the question she always offers when she wants me to think clearly. She said, "What do you actually want?" I told her. I told her all of it. The studio of my own. The ring recovered. The accounting settled. The truth on record somewhere, even if the record was only mine. And something else, something I hesitated over before I said it, which was that I wanted to stop being the person who held everything together for everyone else and received nothing in return. Gloria listened to that last part for a moment. Then she said, "You have always been more than they could see. That is their failure, not your measurement." Then she told me to finish my dinner and she went home. That was the night I decided that the turn had arrived. Not because anything external had changed. Because I had finished sitting with the difficult material and I now knew what I actually had to work with. And what I had was more than most people would have thought, because most people had never paid close enough attention to know what I had built. I called Diane on a Monday morning and told her I was ready to move. She had been patient. Lawyers are trained to wait while clients process, and Diane was a good lawyer in the way that matters most. Not in the way that performs certainty but in the way that knows which lever to apply to which problem and applies it without theatrical flourish. She had reviewed my 3 folders. She had her own assessment of what was available to us and what would be practical and what would simply cost me more in emotional and financial energy than any outcome was worth. We met on a Wednesday. I sat across from her in an office that smelled of good coffee and older paper and I told her what I wanted. I wanted the $11,000 I was owed from the joint wedding account. I wanted the documentation of the ring's provenance and legal ownership in my name formalized so that there was no ambiguity about who owned what. I wanted the full accounting of my financial contributions to the shared life, which Diane had calculated at $31,000 once you included the 18 months of shared expenses I had covered disproportionately. And I wanted none of it to require a courtroom, because a courtroom would cost time and money and visibility, and I was done performing anything for anyone. Diane said, "This is entirely achievable." She made a note. Then she said, "I have a question. The ring, the one currently in your studio vault. When you took it back and replaced it with the reproduction, you did this before the engagement was formally ended." I said, "Yes." She thought for a moment. Then she said, "The provenance documentation is in your name. The ring was made by you, certified by you, appraised under your professional capacity. The stone was sourced and purchased by you. The setting was fabricated by you. There is, in a strict legal sense, an argument that the ring was a professional creation before it was a personal gift, and that the terms of its ownership were never formally transferred in any documented way." I said, "That is accurate." She made another note. She said, "I will not pursue this angle unless it becomes necessary. But I want you to know it is there." I thanked her. We shook hands. She filed the first letter to Derek's attorney 4 days later. The reply came within a week. It was defensive in tone but not aggressive, which told me that Derek's attorney had advised him that a contested proceeding was not in his interest. The financial settlement negotiation took 3 weeks total. At the end of it, Derek's attorney proposed the $11,000 from the wedding deposits plus an additional $8,000 to cover a portion of the shared expenses, for a total of $19,000. I told Diane I would accept the full 31,000 or we would proceed. The counter was 24,000. I said 31. Diane said this with the specific flatness of someone who has said numbers in rooms like this for many years and is not going to be moved by the discomfort they cause. The final settlement was 28,500. Derek paid within 10 days of the signed agreement. I deposited the check on a Tuesday morning and I did not feel satisfaction exactly. I felt the particular relief of accuracy. Of the number being what the number should be. During those same weeks, Gloria began the provenance review on the Calloway estate collection. She had told me she would, and she did, because Gloria is a person whose professional commitments are identical to her personal ones. She began the review in February and she worked through it with the methodical attention that is her defining quality. She pulled the original acquisition documentation for every piece in the collection. She traced the chain of ownership. She verified the certifications against the historical records. It was the kind of work that takes weeks when you do it properly, and Gloria always does it properly. What she found, in the provenance chain of two pieces that had been in the Calloway family since the late 90s, was a gap. Not a fraud. Not a deliberate misrepresentation. A documentation gap of the kind that happens when an estate sale is conducted quickly and records are not preserved with the rigor that current appraisal standards require. The pieces had been described in the previous appraisal cycles based on the family's account of their provenance, which was accepted as reasonable in an earlier period of industry practice and which did not meet the documentation standard that a lender would now require before accepting the pieces as loan collateral. The gap was real. The gap had always been real. Gloria found it because she was doing her job fully, which she always does. The certified value of those two pieces, combined, was $400,000 on the previous appraisal. With the gap in documentation noted and the pieces reclassified pending resolution of the provenance question, their usable collateral value dropped significantly during the review period. This affected Robert Calloway's loan restructuring timeline in ways that I understand from the outside to have been considerable. I was not in any meeting about this. I did not ask Gloria to look for it. It was her appraisal and her finding and her documentation. I was simply the person who had worked alongside her for 9 years and whose name was on 7 other pieces in the same collection, pieces whose provenance was clean and whose documentation was thorough because I had done the work of making it so. Robert Calloway called Derek. Derek called Jenna. Rena called me. Rena said, "Something is happening with the Calloway family finances and Derek is stressed. Do you know anything about this?" I said, "Real estate transactions are complicated and appraisal processes take time. That is all I know." There was a pause. Then Rena said, "Claire, are you okay?" I told her I was better than I had been in a long time. And then I asked about her garden, because she had been talking about planting dahlias the last time we spoke and I actually wanted to know how that was going. The second thing that went wrong for Jenna and Derek happened in May. They had scheduled an engagement photo shoot at a vineyard outside the city. I know this because Jenna promoted it on social media, which I had begun following with the neutral interest of a researcher tracking a subject, tagging the photographer and the location and the date and the wine they were planning to taste afterward. The shoot happened on a Saturday. I spent that Saturday in my studio working on a commission for a client who was buying a piece as a gift for her daughter's graduation, a small aquamarine pendant in a simple gold setting, the kind of work that requires patience and care and produces something genuinely lovely, which is the kind of work I prefer. I heard about the photo shoot afterward, from the photographer's assistant, who was the younger sister of someone I had gone to school with and who mentioned it at a community event the following weekend with no awareness of why I might find it interesting. She said the shoot had gone mostly well but that there had been a hiccup with the ring, that the center stone had shifted during one of the close-up hand shots and the photographer had paused for several minutes while they discussed it. The photos, she said, had not been posted. The client had been disappointed. I listened to this with the expression of someone hearing a mildly interesting piece of industry information. Then I asked about her sister and finished my glass of sparkling water and excused myself. The engagement photos were eventually taken at a different location 3 weeks later. The ring, I was told through Rena, had been taken to a local jewelry shop and the stone reset. The shop, which I know and which does competent but not exceptional work, reset the stone in a bezel with a conventional depth. The synthetic spinel, under the hands of someone who was not looking for signs of a synthetic, presented as a reasonable gemstone. It held. For now. The third thing happened in late June. Jenna and Derek had booked their wedding venue in March, a restored estate on the east side of the city that was very popular for summer weddings, very specific about its payment schedule, and very clear in its contracts about deposit requirements. The deposit was drawn from a joint account they had established together. What Jenna did not know, because it had happened quietly and correctly and without announcement, was that the account she had set up had a co-signer listed from a period, several years earlier, when she and I had briefly shared a car insurance policy and briefly linked accounts for a joint payment arrangement that we had set up and then mostly forgotten. I had removed myself as co-signer on that account in March, which was my legal right and which my bank had processed and documented without drama. The removal had not been communicated to Jenna because I had no obligation to communicate it and because she had not consulted me when she used the account structure for her own purposes. The deposit check bounced. I know this because Rena told me, and Rena knows because she heard it from my mother, and my mother knew because Jenna called her, and Jenna called Derek, and Derek, I am told, said something that was not kind. Jenna called me for the first time in 6 months. Her voice was controlled in the particular way of someone who has decided not to cry and is maintaining that decision through effort. She asked if I had done something to the account. I told her I had removed myself as co-signer from an account I had co-signed in error, which was my right, and that the removal was properly documented, and that I was sorry she was experiencing difficulties with her planning. Then I asked, in the most neutral tone I could produce, how is the ring holding up? There was a silence. Then she said, fine. It is fine. I said, good. I am glad to hear that. We said goodbye. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after the call ended and I thought about the version of myself that had existed a year earlier, the one who arranged dinners and filled in the gaps and helped carry things for everyone else without keeping a register of the weight. I felt grief for her. Not bitterness. Genuine grief. She had been doing her best with what she understood about how to be a person, and what she had not understood was that generosity without accountability is not virtue but erosion. I did not feel grief for Jenna or for Derek. I had passed through that. The venue was rebooked at a smaller facility on the north end of the city. The wedding was moved from August to October. Jenna did not call again. The fourth development happened through Gloria, in August, when she concluded the provenance review and submitted her findings to the Callaway estate attorney and to the bank handling Robert's restructuring. The findings were accurate and thorough and entirely professional. They were also, for Robert Callaway's timeline, consequential. The restructuring was delayed by 4 months. The delay affected a property deal Robert had been developing with Derek as a junior partner, which had been funded in part by the anticipated resolution of the restructuring. The deal did not fall apart completely, but it was substantially revised downward in scope, which meant that the role Derek had anticipated playing in it, and the income he had expected from it, was significantly reduced. I know this because Robert Callaway called Gloria to discuss the findings. And because, in that conversation, Robert asked whether there was any flexibility in the review timeline. Gloria said what she always says when someone asks her whether accuracy has a flexible timeline. She said, the work requires what the work requires. Then she told me that, at the end of that conversation, she had said something else. She had told Robert Callaway that Claire Alderman was one of the finest gemologists she had worked with in 30 years, that her work was on record throughout the firm, and that she hoped the family understood what they had in her professionally. She said she wanted them to know that. I asked Gloria why she had said that. She said, because they should know it. And because some seeds are simply worth planting. I went home that evening and I sat in the sublet apartment I had moved into in April, which was small and poorly lit and not a place I intended to stay, and I looked at the drawings I had pinned to the wall above the small table I used as a desk. The studio drawings. The business model. The client list I had been quietly building on a separate spreadsheet since March. The sketch of the ring I was planning to make for myself someday, the one that would belong to the life I was building rather than the life I had expected to be living. Then I opened my email and read the latest message from Marcus Webb, who had sent me a photograph of a parcel of Montana sapphires he had found at a small estate sale in Missoula, with a one-line note that said, "Thought of you immediately. Tell me what you see." I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I wrote back. I told him what I saw. My mother called me in September, 3 weeks before the wedding. She said, "I want to ask if you will come." I had been expecting the call. I had also been deciding, for several weeks, what I would say when it arrived. I had talked to Rena about it. I had talked to no one else, because Rena was the only person whose counsel I trusted to be both honest and untangled from the various loyalties that everyone else was navigating. Rena said, "You do not owe them anything. You also do not owe yourself the guilt of not going. Do what closes it for you." That was the right way to frame it. Not what the situation required of me. What would close it for me? I thought about the version of this story where I did not go. Where I let the day pass at my workbench and found out afterward from Rena what had happened. It was a clean version. It protected me from certain kinds of pain. But it also left the story open, and I am the kind of person who needs things to close. I need to sit in the room where the truth is present and watch it be present. I need the ending to happen while I am in it. So I told my mother I would come. She said, "I know this is a great deal to ask of you." I told her she was right that it was. I did not soften it. But I told her I would come, and I would sit somewhere other than the front, and I would not make the day about anything other than the day. She said thank you. I could hear in her voice something that was either relief or gratitude or a more complex feeling than either of those, something in the range of people who understand they have done wrong and do not know yet how to do otherwise. I did not help her with it. I said goodbye and went back to my work. The dress I chose was dove gray, 3/4 length, simple in the way of things that cost a certain amount and do not announce it. I chose shoes that would carry me through several hours without becoming a problem. I did not wear a statement necklace. I wore a pair of small gold earrings I had made myself, old mine-cut diamond studs and a simple bezel, nothing decorative but everything right. On my right hand I wore the original ring. The real one. Not as a performance, not as a declaration, but because it was mine and it belonged on a hand and there was no reason it should sit in a vault while I dressed for an occasion. The ceremony was held at a small white church on the east side that Jenna had always liked, one of those churches that photographs beautifully in October light, and it did. I sat in the third row, left side, between Rena and one of my mother's neighbors, a woman named Patricia who had known me since I was 4 and who patted my hand when I sat down in a way that was not prying but was genuinely kind. The ceremony proceeded the way ceremonies proceed. Music, entrance, vows, the usual arrangement. Derek looked handsome in the way he has always looked handsome, put together in his surface presentation, something slightly distracted in his eyes when you watched him for more than a few seconds. Jenna was beautiful. She was wearing the dress that had my name on the original order, though the seamstress had made adjustments for her different measurements, and it fit her well. She walked down the aisle on my father's arm and my father, when he passed the row where I was sitting, did not look at me, and I found I felt something about that which was neither anger nor sorrow but a quieter and more final kind of understanding about what I could expect from him going forward. The ring was on her finger. I could see it from the third row. Even at that distance, with ceremony candles and the October afternoon light coming through the windows, I could see it was not right. The center stone sat without depth. It gave nothing back to the light. I had made it to last exactly this long and I knew, watching her hold Derek's hand during the vows, that I had calibrated it accurately. The officiant asked the question. I held my breath for 1 second, not because I was tempted, but because the body registers certain moments regardless of what the mind has decided. Then I breathed out and folded my hands in my lap and watched my sister become a wife. The reception was in an adjoining hall that had been decorated with pale autumn flowers and very good candles and a great deal of draped fabric that was doing its best to make the smaller venue feel expansive. It almost succeeded. I found my seat at a table near the left side of the room, with Rena and Patricia and two of my parents' neighbors who were pleasant and asked careful questions about my studio and seemed genuinely interested in the answers, which made them, for the duration of dinner, my favorite people in the room. The food was good. I ate most of mine. Rena talked to me about her garden and about the novel she was reading and about a trip she was considering, and I was grateful to her for giving me something ordinary to be inside of while the room did its reception business around us. The toasts began after the main course. Derek's best man stood and said the expected things about loyalty and friendship and finding the right person, and he said them with the particular conviction of someone who knows at least some of what has happened and has decided that his job is to be supportive rather than to let the truth be part of his speech. My father stood and spoke for about 4 minutes. He talked about Jenna's warmth and her beauty and the way she lit up any room she entered, and he talked about Derek's character and his ambition and the life he believed they were going to build together. He did not say my name. He did not look at my row. He raised his glass and sat down, and my mother touched his arm in the way she touches things when she is managing a feeling she has not yet found language for. Then Jenna stood to say something of her own. This was not on the program, which I could see from the small printed card on the table, but people often improvise at these moments and no one was going to stop the bride. She stood with her champagne glass and she began to speak about gratitude and about finding a person who sees you and about the road that brought her here. She was not a bad speaker. She had the kind of naturalness in front of people that comes from having always been the one people wanted to watch. She raised her glass in a final gesture, the kind of gesture that says, "Look at this, look at all of this, look at what I have." Her left hand came up with the glass and the ring caught the light from the chandelier directly above the head table. And it cracked. Not a dramatic shatter. Not a collapse. A clean split along the girdle of the synthetic spinel, right through the center, audible at the head table as a small, sharp sound, the sound of a material failing at its design threshold under the accumulated pressure of 7 months of daily wear and the specific moment of a champagne toast at a well-lit reception. Jenna's hand froze. She looked at it. The stone, still in its bezel, had split into 2 visible sections, the break catching the chandelier light in a way that made it unmissable. The table went quiet. Then the tables adjacent to the head table went quiet, in the concentric way that silence spreads in a room when something has happened that everyone understands is significant without yet knowing exactly why. Derek's mother, Vivian Calloway, who was seated to his left and who had sharp eyes and a decades-long familiarity with the stones in her own family's collection, looked at the ring. Then she looked at her son. Then she said, in a voice that was intended to be quiet but was not entirely quiet, "Derek. What is that stone?" Derek said something that I could not hear from the third row. Vivian said, "That is not the Ceylon sapphire you described to your father. That stone is not a sapphire." The silence expanded. Derek said something else. Vivian's voice came back more clearly. "I know what a sapphire looks like. We have 3 of them certified through Gloria's firm. That is not a sapphire." Robert Calloway set down his glass. The room was not entirely silent. There was the sound of other tables continuing their conversations, the sound of the catering staff moving near the back of the hall, the sound of the music at a low volume from the corner. But the space around the head table had gone to that particular quiet that gathers when a private thing becomes public without anyone's permission. Jenna turned from the head table. She was scanning the room. I knew she would find me eventually because I have known since childhood the way she looks for me when something has gone wrong, a fact that is not warm to sit with but is simply true. Her eyes moved through the tables and then they found me in the third row and they stayed there. I did not look away. I did not arrange my expression into anything in particular. I simply held her gaze with the steadiness of someone who has been holding steady for 10 months and has become, through necessity and practice, very good at it. I looked at her the way I look at a stone I am examining, with full attention and without performance. Then I reached into my pearl-clasped clutch and I removed the original ring. I placed it on the white tablecloth in front of me. The sapphire caught the light immediately, the way it always does, throwing a deep blue that shifted in the chandelier's warmth to something between cerulean and violet, which is what a natural Ceylon sapphire of that quality does under warm indoor light, which is one of the things that makes natural sapphires irreplaceable and is something no synthetic can replicate. Rena, who was seated beside me, looked at the ring on the tablecloth. Then she looked at the head table. Then she looked at me. She said nothing. She was, as I said, the most honest person in my family, and she understood exactly what she was looking at. I did not stand. I did not address the room. I did not say a single word to a single person. I simply sat in my dove-gray dress in the third row with my original ring on the white cloth in front of me, and I let the truth arrange itself in the space without any help from me. Vivian Calloway was still speaking to her son. Robert Calloway was looking across the room in the direction of the table where his wife was gesturing. Derek had gone the color that very fair people go when they understand that something has caught them and there is no misdirection available. Jenna was still looking at me. I held her gaze for another moment. Then I picked up the ring from the tablecloth, placed it back on my right hand, turned to Patricia on my left, and asked her whether she wanted to try the dessert that the caterer appeared to be preparing to bring out, because it looked like it might be a good pear tart and I had always been fond of pear tart. Patricia, who had excellent social instincts, said she would love some. We talked about pear tarts for several minutes. It was, genuinely, a very good conversation. I left before the cutting of the cake. I said goodbye to Rena and to Patricia and to the neighbors I had spent the evening talking to, and I walked out through the side exit of the hall into the October evening, which was cold and clear and smelled like leaves, and I stood in the parking lot for a moment and looked up at the sky, which was that deep blue that only happens in October around 8 in the evening just after the light is gone but before full dark. The same blue as the stone on my right hand. I had noticed this before, that particular overlap of color, and it still pleased me. I drove home. I made tea. I sat in the window of my sublet and I thought, for a while, about nothing in particular. Then I opened my laptop and I looked at the lease terms on the studio space I had been in negotiation over for 3 months, the one with good north light and a back room I could use for vault storage, and I signed the letter of intent. I had been waiting until the timing felt right. It felt right. What happened in the weeks and months after the wedding settled the way consequences settle, not all at once but in layers, each one landing with the weight of what it actually was. Vivian Calloway demanded a full explanation of the ring. Derek told her, I understand from Rena who heard it from her mother who heard it from someone at the wedding, that the original stone had been damaged and replaced before the ceremony, which is the kind of explanation that sounds plausible until you ask someone who knows anything about sapphires why a replacement sapphire would be a synthetic. The explanation did not satisfy Vivian. It did not satisfy Robert either. They asked questions that Derek could not answer without either telling the full story, which he could not tell without exposing a significant amount about himself that he preferred not to expose, or maintaining the lie, which had become very difficult to maintain. The ring story is not what ended them. I want to be careful about this because I do not want to overstate my role in a set of events that was already in motion from its own internal logic. What ended Derek and Jenna was the same thing that ends most relationships built on a foundation of shared deception, which is that once the circumstances that made the deception exciting are replaced by ordinary life, the thing you actually have in common is revealed to be quite small. They had in common the experience of wanting something that belonged to someone else, and the willingness to take it. That is not, it turns out, enough to sustain a shared life through a delayed loan restructuring and a dramatically reduced income projection and an angry mother-in-law who now understood that her son had misrepresented the engagement ring he had put on his fiance's finger. I do not know the details of their separation because I was not there and because no one I would ask directly was there. I know it happened before the end of the year because Rena told me in December, in a text message that read, "It is over between them." I thought you should know. I replied, okay. And then, after a moment, I wrote, "How are you?" She wrote back, "I am good. How are you? I wrote, I really am. The studio opened on the 1st of December. I want to tell you about the studio because it is the most important thing in this story, more important than the ring switch, more important than the financial settlement, more important than any moment at the wedding reception. The studio is the thing I was building all along, not as a strategic move and not as a reaction to anything that had been done to me, but as the natural extension of 9 years of work and a particular kind of clarity you can only get by losing the things that were obscuring the view. The studio is in a building with good north light and exposed brick and a back room I converted into a proper vault and storage space. The front room has 2 workbenches, a client seating area with a small table and 2 chairs, and a display case I built myself from a design I have been sketching for 3 years. The name on the door is Alderman Fine Jewelry, in block letters that are not ornate, because I did not want ornate. I wanted accurate. I hired a part-time assistant in January, a recent graduate from the same fine art program I attended, who has good hands and a better eye than she currently knows and who will, in a year or 2, be designing pieces of her own that she will be proud of. I told her this on her first day. She looked at me the way young people look at you when you say something they want to believe but have not been told enough times to fully trust yet. I told her to pay attention to everything and trust what she actually sees and the rest would follow. Gloria came to the opening. She brought champagne and a card that said, "It was always going to be this." Well done. She stayed for an hour and a half and she talked to every client and guest who came through the door with the specific warmth she reserves for people and occasions she has decided are worth the investment of her full attention. She told a woman who was there to look at rings that Claire Alderman was the most precise stone setter she had worked with in 30 years and that she would be in excellent hands. I heard this from across the room and I felt, for a moment, the uncomplicated warmth of being seen accurately by someone who has known you long enough to be certain. Marcus sent flowers. He had sent me an email 2 weeks earlier, when I posted the studio announcement on my professional page. The email was 3 sentences. It said, "I saw the announcement. I knew this was coming the first time I watched you talk about a Montana sapphire for 40 minutes. I hope the opening goes exactly as you want it to." The flowers arrived before I unlocked the door on the morning of the 1st, which means he had calculated the time zone difference and placed the order the previous night, which is the kind of detail that tells you something about a person without them needing to say it. They were deep blue irises, which I had not told him were my favorite flower, but which he had apparently gathered from something I said at the trade show the previous March, which I cannot specifically remember saying but which is entirely possible because I do talk about what pleases me when I am comfortable. He called that evening. We talked for an hour and 50 minutes. The work portion of that conversation was perhaps 20 minutes. The rest was everything else. We talked about what he had seen at a sale in Bozeman the previous week. We talked about a book he had been reading about the geological formation of Montana's sapphire deposits, which I then ordered while we were talking so I could read it before our next call, which we both understood there would be. We talked about his family, who are from Central Texas and who he described with the kind of wry affection you develop for people you love but have had to learn to navigate. We talked about the specific pleasure of October evenings in cities that have good light and cold air, which is a thing I had never tried to talk about with anyone before and which he seemed to understand exactly. He was coming to the city in February for a stone and jewelry show where I had a booth. He asked if I would have dinner with him. I said yes without the pause that I usually give myself to deliberate, which is not my usual manner and which surprised me enough that I noticed it. I decided the noticing was information. I filed it accordingly. Jenna called me twice in November. I let the first call go to voicemail. The voicemail was brief and quiet. She said she was not calling to explain anything or to ask for anything. She said she called because she needed to hear my voice, which I thought was honest in the particular way that honesty sometimes comes too late to change what has already happened. I let the second call go to voicemail as well. That message said, "I know I do not have the right to ask you for anything. I know that. I just want you to know that I know it." I have not called her back. I have not decided whether I will. There is a version of this story where I do, eventually, and where the conversation is the particular kind of difficult that also clears something out of the air, and where the sisters that Jenna and I might have been to each other if things had gone differently become, at least partially, the sisters we still are. I do not know yet if that version is the one I am living in. Some distance is close and some do not. I am not in a hurry to know which kind this one is. I am learning, slowly, that not every ending needs to be forced into resolution before it is ready. My mother has called. We have talked. The conversations are careful in the way that conversations are when a relationship is being reconstructed at a smaller scale than the one it existed at before. She is trying in the way that people try when they understand they failed but do not have a clear map for doing it differently. I am trying in the way that people try when they have decided that holding resentment is too heavy a thing to carry while you are also building a studio and a client list and learning that February dinners in this city can sometimes have the particular warmth of sitting across from someone who looked at you from the beginning and saw what was actually there. The real ring is in a display case in my studio. Not because I cannot wear it, not because I am waiting for a certain moment, but because it belongs in the inventory of my own professional life. It is documented and certified and appraised, and it is mine in every sense that matters. I have labeled it accordingly. It is available for sale to the right collector at the right price, and when it finds its buyer I will feel the satisfaction of something that was made with care reaching the person who understands its value, which is what I always hope for the things I make. I am designing myself a new ring. The sketch is pinned to the wall above my design table, where I can see it when I am working. It is different from the first one in ways that feel right. An Alexandrite center stone, which is the stone I have been most fascinated by for the past 10 years and have somehow never used for my own work, a stone that shows green in daylight and shifts to red under incandescent light, which people often describe as magical and which I would describe as accurate, because the stone is not performing two different colors, it is simply responding with precision to whatever light it is given. Old cut diamonds on the shoulders, hexagonal prongs in oxidized gold, a slightly lower profile than the first ring because I have learned to prefer things that are close to the hand rather than elevated above it. I will make it when the commission queue gives me the right week for it. I am not in a hurry. I have learned, in this past year, the value of not rushing a material that needs time. To anyone watching this who is in the middle of what I was in the middle of 10 months ago, I want to say one thing that is not a reassurance and not a promise but is simply what I know to be true from having lived it. What is taken from you is not the whole of what you have. The ground under you is more solid than it is possible to feel when the weight of a betrayal is sitting on top of it. The people who arranged themselves against you, without asking for your side, have told you something true about themselves that you will need to know going forward, and knowing it earlier rather than later is a kind of gift, even though it does not feel that way at the time. And the thing you made, the thing that is yours because you built it before anyone arrived and while no one was watching, that thing is still there. It is in a vault or on a workbench or in the muscle memory of your hands. No one took it. No one can. Build from it. If this story stayed with you, I would be grateful if you stayed with me. There are more of these. More people who built carefully and quietly after something loud was taken from them, and more moments where the thing that looked like an ending was only the clearing of the ground. Subscribe and I will keep telling them. My name is Claire Alderman. I design jewelry and I certify stones and I know the difference between what is real and what only looks like it is. That is everything. And it is enough.